So many of the solutions that we're looking for today live at the intersection of industry, healthcare, and of course, patients. The research community can be fiercely competitive, but at the same time, highly collaborative. There are new approaches using data, modeling, AI, and ML that are helping us to reduce or potentially even eliminate the burden of enrollment of patients into new clinical trials. I think a first big shift for pharma on the horizon would be to stop listening to patients. We need to stop listening and we need to engage and have conversation.
Craig, I'm so glad to be speaking with you today, a recognized leader at the forefront of clinical research and medicine development. You headed up clinical innovation with Pfizer for a number of years. I'm looking forward to spending some time with you, hearing some updates from the pharmaceutical frontier, and sharing thoughts on how digital technologies and the pandemic are shaping the modern pharma industry. To get started, Craig, is there anything you would like to tell us about your career and background?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to share this conversation today. So my background spans across pharma. I had the opportunity to work in both biotech as well as with large pharma. I've worked in academia and currently am an assistant professor at Rutgers University. I've served as a patient advocate as the vice president for the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And I also am helping to support health systems in the United States. I serve as the vice chair for the MedStar Health Research Institute. It chose these deliberately because I think so many of the solutions that we're looking for today live at the intersection of industry, healthcare, and of course, patients.
In the previous 2 years, while the society was keeping a close eye on the progress of development of COVID-19 vaccines, what other achievements happening in the industry have we possibly overlooked?
I think over the past 2 years, we've seen industry do some remarkable collaborations. There's been some remarkable agility and speed with which development programs and research programs have taken place. But perhaps the area that we've overlooked has been the mindset shift that's taken place. It's one thing for us to look at some of the different tactics and strategies that have emerged over the last 2 years, many of which we're looking as an ecosystem to stabilize and normalize as part of our future. Perhaps the area we're overlooking is that mindset change, that willingness to take thoughtful risk in our research and development programs and all of our organizations. It's that thoughtful risk-taking that we need to see continue and sustained most beyond this pandemic.
It is widely recognized that COVID-19 vaccine development in such a short period of time is an outstanding example of international cooperation in drug development. In one of your recent interviews, you said that 2021 was a remarkable year for the clinical trial industry in terms of innovation and adoption of new models of cooperation. So let's speak to how companies and governments collaborate to improve the discovery and development of new types of drugs and cures.
Over the course of the pandemic, we've seen industry, government, and many other stakeholders collaborating in ways that really have never been able to see before. I think that has brought about an incredible spike in the adoption of innovative new approaches and strategies that perhaps have been with us for some time, but struggled to see daylight, struggled to see adoption. Many of these approaches, whether the uses of data or digital or just driving collaborations across different stakeholders, aren't necessarily new. They weren't created or invented during the pandemic. What's been new for us is to see this remarkable adoption. And this adoption is really the most exciting thing coming out of the pandemic right now.
Successful drug development depends on making wise decisions about portfolios, clinical trials, marketing. Companies are continuously faced with the challenge of deciding whether to continue development or stop it. They gather data, analyze it to build models that they use to predict what may happen in the next trial. What are the biggest opportunities for applying digital technologies to improve access to new drugs and cost effectiveness of their development?
There are many factors that go into pricing for new medicines that drive so much around access and affordability on a local basis, on a global basis. But certainly some of those costs are borne just in the expense and the time associated with research and development of new medicines. When we're able to develop medicines in faster and in smarter ways, we create opportunities for us to impact affordability, access, and other attributes because we're able to develop these medicines more efficiently, faster, less expensive, leveraging better technology and better data for both study design, planning, conduct, really from end to end in terms of our ability to leverage digital and data across the development process.
You speak a lot about decentralized clinical trials. Can you please describe key differences and benefits of this approach in modern medical science?
Clinical trials are the cornerstone of how we understand the efficacy and safety of new medicines, but traditional clinical trials have relied on patients, people, to have to travel a distance and take time off from work in order to get to large research centers. They travel in and out of those centers with a pretty high rate of frequency for different visits. Those visits are dictated by the study protocol. Decentralized clinical trials create the opportunity for us to enable visits to take place outside of a traditional research setting. They leverage technology and innovations in new processes to make that happen. Technologies like using video or electronic informed consent or remote monitoring or digital measurements, and process innovations like home health or our ability to extend the drug supply chain for new medicines to reach people where they are. Whatever that combination of tools, the opportunity for us is vast as we find these ways to enable participation that can be more accessible, enabling more people to participate from around the world.
How did DCD help with the development of COVID-19 vaccine?
Over the course of the pandemic, we had medicines being developed for COVID-19, whether vaccines or new treatments. We also had the rest of the medicines that were already being developed for diseases with unmet need around the world. In both of these cases, we relied on a number of different decentralized methods to help make sure that patients were able to get into studies and be followed for studies in terms of efficacy and safety. When we look at the vaccine studies, so much of those did include elements like electronic consent and the ability for patients to be followed over time using digital measures. We saw the same with many of the COVID treatments that have been developed. But importantly, the community, the research community, didn't drop the ball on the rest of the medicines that were already in development prior to the pandemic, where patients around the world are waiting for these new breakthroughs to reach them. So even there, we saw many of these same tools, methods, and approaches being leveraged in order to sustain and maintain those different research programs.
Thank you, Craig. Hey, randomized controlled trials have been held up as the gold standard of clinical research for a long time. But this design of trials is not always feasible for technical and ethical reasons. Do you think the technology-first and flexible DCD approach could overcome the limitations of randomized controlled trials in order to achieve the highest possible level of evidence?
Randomized clinical trials are a mainstay of how we understand efficacy and safety of new medicines, but they're hardly the only method or process available for us, and there continue to be some incredible new innovations, both in methods and in technologies that we can incorporate in order to answer questions about evidence of efficacy and safety. Some of these are incorporating real-world data in better and smarter ways, and how we can use existing data, whether electronic health records or otherwise, to help understand the efficacy and safety of new medicines, including for new indications where we might have otherwise had to rely on a randomized clinical trial. In other cases, we see new study designs, whether leveraging decentralized or otherwise, such as master protocols, and our ability to run studies that evaluate multiple new medicines under one protocol with one set of infrastructure wrapped around it. In other cases, we see some really exciting new uses of digital and data, such as our ability to spare or perhaps even eliminate over time control arms for clinical trials. Control arms using synthetic data, using synthetic control arms. So our ability here to leverage electronic health records as an alternative for a control arm, to leverage existing data from past studies, or the possibility for us to use AI and machine learning in order to generate synthetic data based on the patients who are randomized in this study in order to, again, reduce or eliminate the burden of control arms for patients who are interested in research participation.
That sounds great. Can you share any real examples of how digital technologies optimize clinical trials considering such factors as time, distance, or else, importantly, without compromising on their effectiveness?
The opportunities for us to use digital and data in smarter ways really begin in the design and planning stages of a research program. What are the endpoints that we're planning to use in order to understand the efficacy and safety of that medicine, and how can we use digital to modernize those endpoints? Some of our measurements that we rely on for studies are sorely out of date. These legacy measurements tend to be used and reused, but what we're seeing today are more and more organizations committing to the use of digital and ways to modernize endpoints. We're also seeing organizations actively using data in smarter ways to test and optimize their study protocols, whether using electronic health record data or vast numbers of other data sets to test and challenge study protocols in ways that can help to reduce or eliminate amendments and other factors that can cause delays in studies later on. And of course, our ability to use many of these same methods and approaches, as well as others, in order to spare visits for research participants, enabling more and more diverse patients from different geographies and different backgrounds, patients who may have been marginalized because of distance or time needed in order to participate in studies. These uses of digital and data are here with us today. Organizations are actively using these every day of the week for their existing and their new studies, and the numbers of these uses continues to grow and expand.
What are the points of growth for decentralized clinical trials? How do you see these in 5 years?
In many ways, we're still at decentralized clinical trials version 1.0. As organizations are looking to stabilize and normalize their uses of video and electronic consent, of some basic digital measurements, as well as process innovations like their use of home health, extending the drug supply chain, as well as process innovation, such as their use of home health or extending the drug supply chain for patients to be able to participate from home. That's really just the beginning for us, because now we're already starting to see the signs of what decentralized trials 2.0 will look like. Because as organizations are stabilizing these initial methods and processes and technologies in their organization, they're now beginning to experiment more and more with many new and interesting edge cases, whether that's the use of mobile research sites or pop-up sites, or use of technology that can enable visits to be hosted inside of treating physicians' offices. The scope and the span of location will continue to grow and diversify. Where in the first round of decentralization, this really was a story of research site or participate from home, now we're really seeing a litany of different locations starting to emerge.
Today, we'd like to tell you about one of the projects we have launched, the Sun Charity Fund. Sun Charity is a non-profit organization established to support Ukraine during the war. Its main task is to provide Ukrainian healthcare institutions with the things they really need: medical consumables, medications, equipment. All these helps to save lives. And all this is vitally important for defending country, inhabitants of which are at great risk and can be deprived of timely access to medical care if we do not take decisive actions. Sun Charity has already delivered multifunctional systems for real-time monitoring of patient vital parameters to the Cherkasky Regional Oncology Center. Also, we have purchased medical consumables for a maternity hospital in Cherkasy, and this is just the beginning. If you are not ready to put up with injustice and can't let people suffer and die, let's do what we can together. In the video description, you can find the account numbers of our fund. We know that every drop, every little contribution always turns out to be really important. Sun Charity, let's help together.
The Decentralized Trial and Research Alliance, DTRA, was formed in 2020 with more than 70 founding members from pharma and technology companies as the coronavirus was sweeping the world and sponsor companies were scrambling to adopt decentralized technologies in order to keep their clinical trials on track. As DTRA's co-chair, what do you feel are some of the biggest challenges DTRA has experienced so far?
The research community can be fiercely competitive, but at the same time, highly collaborative. And there are example after example of spaces where the diverse research community is able to work together to solve challenges that plague all of us. We operate in a highly shared economy, whether we think about research sites, the tools that are used at different institutions to measure images or diagnostic lab data, patients themselves. All of these resources and people are precious and valuable, but operate in a very shared ecosystem. And so within DTRA, the Decentralized Trials Research Alliance, we're leveraging many of the best practices of initiatives and collaborations that preceded us, and finding these ways for like-minded organizations and leaders to come together and solve shared challenges. Some of these shared challenges might be as basic as best practices and instances where some organizations have solved a problem that others might still find vexing. In other cases, we're working together to grow libraries of evidence so that we can have true data to rely upon and help to grow this community through education. In other areas, challenges such as regulatory ambiguity or variability, data flows and interoperability, to name a few. And these are areas that are ripe for collaboration, for organizations to come together, working together to address those shared challenges.
Yes, I understand. What are the major achievements you have made?
As DTRA enters its 18th month of operation, we began by bringing together what are now 130 organizations around the world to define a set of priorities, shared challenges across this ecosystem. That gave birth to 12 initiatives that have been recognized as key challenges where solutions built together are needed. As we're sitting in 2022, approaching the midpoint this year, we're already starting to see many of these initiatives starting to bear fruit. Over the course of 2022, most of the DTRA initiatives will have some initial work product. In some cases, that work product will be finalized. In other cases, it will be the first version of a solution that will continue to grow and evolve over the coming months and years as new learning and evidence develops.
How much effort and investment has it taken to develop the necessary tools for remote collaboration, to build knowledge repositories and mechanisms for information sharing, data analysis, and what are the next steps on the agenda?
As the DTRA initiatives continue to mature and reach their work product, we'll continue to use the DTRA annual meeting as an important space for convening and sharing. We now have an active regulatory forum as well as more regulators that are joining the Decentralized Trials Research Alliance, and that will be an important way for us to continue to work together with global regulatory authorities to remove any sense of ambiguity and to help share evidence of impact as that library continues to grow. We'll also see our members continue to work together in identifying where those next challenges remain. We have a model of collabs within DTRA which enable our members to identify a new challenge and work together to address that. One collab that's just in its infancy is around diversity and inclusion in our trials. and ways that we can share best practices with decentralized research to help ensure that our studies are inclusive and representative of the patient population that are being impacted by a condition.
Are all companies happy to adopt decentralized trial technologies? And if not, what are the major blockers along the way?
I would say that today, most all of the major larger CROs and pharma sponsors are actively implementing decentralized research within their portfolio and working within their organizations to drive scale and adoption. It's a process of change, whether it starts with looking at existing SOPs and training, looking at existing templates like study protocols, looking at existing vendors and partners that are available within the organization. Some organizations may be farther along than others. Some organizations had actually started some of this process around driving new culture even prior to the pandemic, and they certainly might have an advantage in terms of where they are relative to others. But rest assured that most all major pharma sponsors, as well as many of the mid-sized companies, are somewhere on this change curve. This is not a set of tools that are exclusive to large pharma companies or companies that have very specific portfolios. Most all studies in an organization are able to incorporate at least some decentralized methods that can help to improve access and experience for research participants.
What advantages do you see in silico clinical trials compared to other methods? What role do they play in modern drug development?
We're really at the infancy of understanding the true range and impact in our use of data as a potential alternative to enrolling active new participants in a research study. And how might we use sophisticated modeling coupled with expansive sets of data to train machines that can help us to better understand how patients might perform with an investigational medicine in terms of efficacy and safety, as well as those patients who might serve as comparator arms for those who would have been enrolled in a trial. Much of this work is beginning by looking at our control arms in research studies, spaces where natural history data may be available to help us to train algorithms that can help support studies potentially without the burden of enrolling patients to serve in a control arm. Over time, this type of confidence in our modeling very likely will start to expand even further into our understanding of how patients might perform if exposed to an investigational new medicine, as our understanding of systems biology and the mechanisms of different drugs continues to mature.
How likely is that living trial participants will be replaced by powerful AI to manage the whole drug discovery process? What are the achievements and points of growth in this area so far?
In the clinical research universe, most all entities run the risk of becoming obsolete. That's not a bad thing. Obsolescence in some ways is a very strong positive. In many cases, organizations shouldn't fight obsolescence. They should fight to continue to evolve themselves to find ways that they can contribute meaningfully. But I would say that one stakeholder in particular that will not fight obsolescence would be the research participant. The individual who today is taking time off and exposing themselves to an investigational medicine, sharing data, incurring burden along the way to help us to understand if medicine has efficacy and safety that we can accept and tolerate. There are new approaches using data, modeling, AI, and ML that are helping us to reduce or potentially even eliminate the burden of enrollment of patients into new clinical trials. Much of that journey is beginning today with our control arms in studies. Control arms where we might be enrolling individuals who will not be exposed to a new medicine. In some cases, they might be exposed to taking a placebo. In other cases, they may just be taking the routine standard of care that's available for their illness. But in either case, our ability to use data and modeling begins here, because this is the space where we have vast amounts of real-world data that can be used to help us to train algorithms, machines, and different sophisticated approaches to serve as alternatives for that arm in a study. Over time, we may find ourselves able to use many of these same approaches to help remove or eliminate the burden of patients being exposed to an active drug. I think we'll see this creep in early drug development during portfolio design and planning when we're making decisions about which medicines to keep moving forward and which medicines to deprioritize. We need an industry to understand and make use of this data and these modeling approaches ourselves to inform our own decision making, and as we build confidence with those, continue to bring regulators along with transparency, sharing the progress that's being made and helping us all to build confidence.
Just a couple of months ago, the FDA released the above-mentioned guidance on master protocols and shared their current thinking on efficient clinical trial design strategies to expedite development of drugs and biologics. Can you explain in real plain language on the advantages of master protocols and what therapeutic areas, including oncology, would benefit the most from this approach?
Traditionally, we write study protocols to help us answer a question about a new medicine and if it may be effective and safe in treating a particular condition. But what we see is that in some disease areas, we might have many different protocols running, testing different drugs against a particular medical condition. And as a result, these are all running in parallel. And the studies, the protocols themselves may look surprisingly similar, but yet are requiring a tremendous amount of redundant effort. Networks of research sites, databases being built, recruitment and education campaigns to help physicians and patients to understand about these research studies and how to participate, all sitting alongside of one another. Master protocols create an opportunity for us to run these studies far more efficiently. They're basically superhighways rather than lots of one-lane roads. With a master protocol, we can write a single study design that can enable multiple medicines to be tested concurrently. And when one medicine is working, it can graduate and move on to a more sophisticated study. And if another medicine fails, it can be withdrawn, but the continuation of that master protocol keeps living on. We first see these approaches in oncology, in many ways because of the potential for molecular profiling and other precision medicine approaches to help us to stratify or assign patients to different arms of a study based on their molecular profile. And so with examples that have been with us for some time, like LungMap in lung cancer or I-SPY 2 in breast cancer, patients might be enrolled and provide a diagnostic specimen. Maybe it's a tube of blood or some other specimen that's needed to help us to understand the molecular profile of their disease. And with that molecular profile, we can assign them to the treatment arm that's right for them. Now, this may have started in oncology, but we've already seen this progress into other forms of rare diseases, and now even other highly prevalent diseases, such as Alzheimer's and other indications. I think any instance where we have multiple medicines that can be tested concurrently will create opportunities for us to leverage these far more efficient approaches, which the regulators and other stakeholders continue to show significant amounts of support.
And assuming decentralized trial technologies can assist with implementing master protocols?
Master protocols and decentralized trials fit very nicely alongside of one another. They work together to help improve access and awareness, convenience for more patients to be able to participate. When we're running a master protocol, we have a far more efficient machine for patients to find and match to the right arms of studies that may be best for them. And when we bring in decentralized approaches, we make that participation far more accessible. Taken together, we have a real opportunity to enable deeper and more meaningful participation across geographies, across countries, so that more people who need access to new medicines will reach that access.
Clinical trials of drugs is a key element of pre-market approval of new medicines. Distributed clinical trials can help engage more participants with less effort. At the same time, spontaneous reporting remains the cornerstone of post-marketing drug safety surveillance. But adverse drug reaction documentation is not easy. How can we leverage technologies, including the ones applied in DCT, to help increase effectiveness of pharmacovigilance?
Safety events in clinical trials tend to be understood and reported when patients come in for visits, and their frequency of visits tends to be set by a study protocol. They may be coming in every 6 or 12 weeks. They may be coming in every 6 or 12 months. Those visits are important for us to capture data, including eliciting with the patient if there's been some sort of safety issue. Of course, in the real world, patients aren't necessarily waiting for that doctor's office visit once every 1, 2, or 3 years. Those events, from a safety perspective, may be captured in a little more of a real-time way. And so today what we're starting to see through the use of remote patient monitoring and other types of technologies, whether the trial is decentralized or not, are more continuous ways for us to capture safety data as well. Now, that may be a little disruptive in the near term. People love to make comparisons of an old study to a new, and it may seem a little tricky to make those comparisons when safety reporting frequency moves from an old approach to a new one, but it will more closely resemble the real world, and this progress is vital.
Let's shift our focus for a while. Investments in pharma. What are the most and least lucrative areas to invest in the modern pharmaceutical industry?
Today, we see a tremendous amount of investment around digital and data within pharma in general, within research and development in particular. Organizations are more committed than ever in terms of accessing and leveraging diverse data as a part of their decision making, including the design and planning for clinical trial protocols. In many ways, this is a fabulous opportunity space as more and more organizations build their teams around the anticipated use of data. I think an opportunity for us to keep in mind will be, how do we make sure that our data access is unencumbered? How do we make sure that we're leveraging data in permissioned and transparent ways to ensure its sustainability? As more and more organizations are leveraging data in their organizations, this is a fabulous area of opportunity today. They're leveraging that data as a part of decision-making, certainly in their medicine development and R&D organizations, whether they're planning, designing study protocols. That's a great area of opportunity, but I'd say an even better area of opportunity is to ensure the continuous supply of data for these organizations. We have to make sure we're leveraging data in ways that are transparent and inclusive with patients. If we fail to do that, we place in jeopardy the sustainability of leveraging data for decision making. We have to make sure that people are aware of how their data is being used, especially if it's for good use cases. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and opportunities now exist for more transparent approaches in our leveraging of data for decision making.
Development of drugs for which diseases is traditionally a less promising area to invest in for pharma companies, and how important would the ROI factor be for taking a decision on whether to invest in developing a drug that could possibly save lives of millions or not?
In many ways, the risk and fear around developing drugs in certain areas has shifted over the years as our science and technology has shifted as well. Years back, we routinely ran studies in areas like cardiovascular disease. They were ripe with opportunity, with large, massive clinical trials involved. Over the years, that's really shifted in so many ways, as more and more organizations are deploying highly targeted studies, whether in rare diseases or in oncology, by leveraging precision medicine approaches and far more molecularly targeted new medicines. It's possible that as we bring many of those same precision medicine approaches back into our more prevalent conditions, we'll start to find that there is a whole new universe that had seemed risky to us but is now far more accessible. Today, a lot of drug development in cardiovascular areas, as an example, is looked at as risky because it's requiring massively large clinical trials, extremely expensive. But perhaps as we get better and smarter in our use of data to understand that one large disease may actually be a collection of smaller diseases, we'll find that we're able to develop drugs in these indications that perhaps felt a little distant and risky to us.
Which of the pharma market leaders would you evaluate as currently being the most attractive for investment?
I can empathize that it is very hard to try and separate out different companies in the pharma sector in terms of investment due to their level of adoption of innovative new approaches. It's very hard because very often our only judge of the progress of one company versus another is based on press releases or other news and announcements. Some might find it surprising when a company has an amazing breakthrough in developing a new vaccine, thinking that that company was a laggard, when actually within that organization they had made incredible progress over recent years. I'm afraid I can't be the guy who answers the question of which specific company is the right one in which to invest. What I would suggest, though, is we have to look beyond press releases and rhetoric and try to make sure that we're understanding the culture and readiness to actually embrace those new innovations within any company. All pharma companies are looking at the same universe, the same landscape of digital and data-driven opportunities. The winners will be those that are able to implement within their organizations.
Fair enough, Craig. Thanks for the answer. Hey, in my work, I've seen a number of big pharma companies invest in digital engagement tools, including specialized portals for cancer patients, personalized patient journey tools, and more. Why has this area become so important?
Pharma companies in recent years have done a far better job of actively listening to patients, of engaging patients in different communities, getting closer and better understanding their unmet needs. As companies have gotten better at doing that, they're starting to appreciate the role that they can play in standing up and deploying patient-facing technologies along with their new medicines. Patient-facing technologies, whether portals, apps, self-tracking tools, or otherwise, that can be great companions whether the patient is on their drug or even on a different medicine. In many cases, many of those same approaches can start to work their way back into clinical development and some of the tools and ideas that we're looking to test in the process of clinical trials. These two worlds will ultimately start to bleed closer and closer together. As we give patients different tools to self-track and better manage their care with a commercialized medicine, we can begin to invite them to continue to share data, real-world data with us, to help us to better understand off-label uses, to better understand efficacy and safety in different subpopulations, or those patients who may be also using different other combinations of medicines. And so our continued ability to learn around the efficacy and safety of medicines over time will get easier as we continue to develop and pursue smart and inclusive, transparent strategies of using digital to help patients in their journey.
That makes a lot of sense for sure. We've seen the collapse of market valuation of some of the publicly traded telehealth providers like Teladoc or Amwell after their initially astonishing growth. According to Nature, the total external investment in 14 leading drug discovery AI companies amounted to around $3.5 billion in 2020 and 2021 altogether. Is it a promising area for investment or yet another bubble inflated by the pandemic?
Health technology companies, those whether young or as they mature or access different forms of capital, have a lot of decisions to make in terms of who their customer is and where their revenue will come from. Whether they'll be consumer-facing or operate in the B2B space of healthcare and where their revenue will come from, whether it's self-pay or from insurers. But the segment around life sciences and technology supporting the clinical trial and drug development process is an interesting little subset. The drug development spend in life sciences companies is measured in the billions. It's a brilliant market opportunity for disruption. And it's relatively stable in terms of available revenue, not necessarily as volatile as sectors that are fluctuating based on reimbursement or trying to navigate self-pay with healthcare consumers. And so for many, this market may feel small, targeting the B2B of clinical research with smarter technology, but even in a volatile market, it's proving to be very resilient.
Speaking of the challenges facing the modern pharma, which parts of the pharma value chain would benefit most from applying digital technologies?
There are no shortage of stops on the pharma value chain that can be impacted through the use of smarter technologies, through the use of digital, through the use of data. We certainly see it being applied from manufacturing and research, straight through to commercialization, straight through to health economics, outcomes research, and other aspects around pricing and reimbursement. But I think that there's a reason why we're seeing so much enthusiasm today around the clinical trial and drug development space. I think some of that is because that space has been viewed as somewhat lagging in terms of meaningful disruption through the use of digital and technology. And so while there are phenomenal opportunities end-to-end across an integrated pharmaceutical company, I think that the clinical research space is still ripe for disruption, is still very open for business in terms of new innovations being able to come in, and continues to represent a very exciting piece of the market.
So with all these benefits, what are the major blockers for adoption of digital tech in pharma?
Despite all the enthusiasm, despite all of the opportunity for disruption because of perhaps slow adoption in the past, as well as the exciting new technologies that continue to emerge, change and adoption and challenges in that space are very real. This is times a relatively cautious and reticent space in which to drive change. People are often worried, rightfully so, about two primary variables. We have to make sure we're ensuring patient safety and we're not compromising on data integrity. These two attributes are the ultimate barriers on the side of the road that we shall not cross. But many organizations culturally may have other barriers that get created along the way that can also serve as meaningful challenges to have to overcome to drive adoption on a global basis. Some of the other barriers that may stand in the way are, for instance, around regulatory ambiguity. In many cases, we're getting a better and better understanding of what regulators are looking for with these new approaches, but many organizations operate their development programs on a global basis. When you're operating a study globally, it's sometimes challenging to have to navigate different regulatory expectations in order to support the better and smarter use of some of these exciting new technologies.
What are the major recent achievements in drug discovery in the areas of cardiovascular diseases, cancer, COPD, and diabetes? Which areas are the hottest ones to address and why?
Certainly when we look at pharma pipelines and the progress, when we look at the new drug approvals and launches in recent years, and when you look at much of the shift in terms of revenue, oncology has been a tremendous area of progress with the creation, the availability of new medicines for patients with unmet needs. That's been driven by the biology, it's been driven by data sciences as well. It's driven by the biology as we better understand mechanisms, as we better start to use data and other approaches to drive more precision medicine, and as we better leverage data to explore combinations of treatments for patients. Areas like cardiovascular disease have long been mainstays of the pharmaceutical industry, but it's been somewhat challenging to develop new medicines that can do better than the treatments of the past. I think that areas like cardiovascular are going to see a renaissance based on the precision medicine learnings that we're gaining in areas like oncology. It will enable us to have better targeting of new treatments, smaller and more focused studies, and hopefully more meaningful improvements in efficacy and safety for the patients.
According to the World Health Organization, the top global causes of death include ischemic heart disease, stroke, lower respiratory infections, lung cancers, diabetes, Alzheimer's, diarrhea. But if we look at the trends of the FDA approvals of new drugs over the past 2 decades, we see that antivirals and antibiotics accounted for less than 6%. Cardiovascular and neurological drugs declined from 9 to 5.3 and from 13 to 10% respectively, whereas anti-cancer drugs and biologics increasingly predominated, up to 18% of the total. I see a misalignment between the deadliest diseases and the spectrum of newly developed drugs to manage those. So am I wrong on the numbers, or is it really happening for whatever reason?
We have had a mismatch. That mismatch has grown over recent years between the pipelines of pharma companies and the needs of patients on a global basis. That mismatch in many ways has been driven by the segmentation of developed versus developing regions of the world and many of the concerns around economics and the cost of medicine development today. Perhaps one of the other silver linings coming out of the tragedy of the last 2 years, perhaps one of the other silver linings coming out of the pandemic for us, is this renaissance in antivirals, this renaissance in better development of new technologies that can be deployed to address challenging global unmet need of patients in a far more efficient way. It's not that the treatments for COVID were necessarily developed in a less expensive way, but the incredibly more efficient approaches may now start to lend themselves, many of the learnings from that experience, to help us to develop treatments for these other unmet needs far more efficiently. And in doing so, how can the takeaway from this experience around medicine development and treatments for COVID start to carry over in filling some of the gap that you're pointing to, the gap between, in many cases, what patients need in developed versus developing parts of the world?
I came by to ask, how will the war that is unfortunately shattering some Eastern European countries shape the future of the pharma industry?
The war today is certainly affecting everybody, whether on a business or on a personal basis. It's creating a challenging environment for us all as we operate at an extraordinary global scale, whether that's our offices and business partners that are located in these impacted regions or the patients that we're trying to reach with new medicines or opportunities to help support with clinical trials and new medicine development programs. This impact of the war is also a reminder of the continued global disruptions that we just can't anticipate. Prior to the pandemic, resilience and business continuity for a clinical development program probably focused mostly on computers going down or weather incidents or maybe the risk of a hacking incident affecting our systems. Today we're starting to see really the true scope of the global ecosystem and how this can disrupt a medicine development program at extraordinary global scale. It's calling on us to ensure that we have resilient approaches and systems in our studies. Decentralized trials will be one of those signals of resilience, one of those opportunities for resilience, as we can have better and smarter ways for patients to continue in our trials, even if their location is disrupted by events, whether environmental or unfortunately man-made.
Craig, let's have a real quick look into the pharma of the future and precision medicine. Precision medicine is propelled by technologies that enable molecular profiling, genomic analysis, and optimized drug design to tailor treatments for individual patients. Although precision medicine has resulted in some clinical successes, the use of many potential therapeutics has been hindered by pharmacological issues, including toxicities and drug resistance. What progress has been made in this area in the recent years, and what are the challenges yet to overcome?
The use of different types of molecular profiling has really been a catalyst for precision medicine, but it's been a benefit that's been largely isolated in areas in oncology and really hasn't reached its greatest potential yet in so many other disease areas. It leaves me wondering if the focus on molecular profiling alone will be enough, and if we'll start to see the use of other types of digital measures, digital fingerprints, and other strategies that can complement a molecular profile, leveraging other attributes around a person or a patient. These factors together may provide the type of unique fingerprint, the type of unique signature that we need in order to develop truly targeted medicines that can really help us to show meaningful impact for patients affected by different conditions.
What progress are we making on drug delivery materials and approaches, and what are the opportunities to improve the interaction of synthetic materials with the human body?
No doubt there are a wide number of different improvements that are being made around biomaterials and how drug delivery is happening today, but some that are particularly interesting to me right now are around our ability to make conventional appliances smart. And how can we help make most any drug delivery technology into a smart drug delivery technology, helping us to understand the time, date, and location at which an injection, an inhaler, or some other intervention was being taken or consumed. How can that help us to understand how people are responding to medicines over time and serve as important additional real-world data when we're looking to leverage so many diverse data sets as a part of understanding how medicines are working in the real world?
Sounds like a great opportunity for AI-first companies to leverage their skill in order to overcome the existing challenges.
The touch points for artificial intelligence are pretty tremendous today, and they really hit on so many different areas of the business. But I often think about AI and AI implementation as both our near-term quick wins as well as some of our more long-term ambitious areas. You know, a pharmaceutical company is very attuned to managing a portfolio. This is what they do with their medicines in development every day of the week. And some of those medicines may be higher risk in terms of their ability to move through, and some may be perhaps a lower risk, and the company may look at how they manage a well-balanced portfolio. We need to do the same with our AI initiatives in our organizations, leveraging some AI areas that are lower risk, near-term, winnable areas. Robotic process automation is a great example. How can we take a discrete process in our business and automate it by leveraging AI? On the other hand, there may be other areas that could be a little riskier in terms of success, such as our ability to disrupt a control arm by creating synthetic data based on the patients in the active arm of the trial. Very high potential impact, higher risk in terms of execution. But like everything we want to manage, whether it's our medicine portfolio, our personal finances, or otherwise, how do we manage a diversified approach of different attempts to leverage AI that can impact and improve our business?
Precision medicine, is it mostly about prevention, treatment, or both?
Today, precision medicine has been largely about treatment. It's been largely about leveraging molecular and other types of diagnostic data to help us to drive more targeted therapies, in particular in areas where toxicity may be a significant barrier in our ability to help a patient to benefit from a new medicine. As we're leveraging digital and helping patients with more and more tools further upstream, I agree that there will be even more opportunities to leverage precision medicine and highly targeted approaches for prevention, for other types of patient support. Perhaps our days of shotgun approaches and generalized solutions in general has now come to an end. And when we're thinking about this type of targeting, whether it's for education, retention, or other types of aids and supports for patients, this mindset of precision targeting is really still seemingly at its infancy when we think about all of the other parts around the patient that we can start to impact.
An important resource in medical research and precision medicine are biobanks. There are more than 120 biobanks worldwide, having evolved over the past 30 years, ranging from small, predominantly university-based repositories to large, government-supported resources. What are the main challenges facing development of biobanks?
There are a number of challenges and opportunities as we think about biospecimens being spread across so many different biobanks around the country and around the world today. Perhaps none are as important as our ability to be able to link the individual's consent to the range of different uses and opportunities for that data. When an individual is sharing a biospecimen for research, in most cases, they want that specimen to be reaching the farthest opportunity and potential that it possibly can. That needs to be a part of their consent, and we have to make sure that that biospecimen is known and accessible to the broadest number of researchers consistent with that consent. This may start to emerge as an opportunity for new and emerging technologies, areas like blockchain that can help us to distribute and better manage the consent process without relying on individual companies to have to track and manage that on their own, and instead shift to more distributed and communal approaches.
So it seems the one way to increase the medical value of biobanks is by linking them to EHR systems, which could enable not just retrospective, but also lifelong perspective longitudinal studies of participating citizens. You've mentioned blockchain. What other ways to leverage biobanks and mitigate the ethical and legal concerns pertaining to their use can you suggest?
Perhaps one of our biggest disruptors in using biospecimens and leveraging the potential of biobanks is through transparency back with the patients who provided those specimens. When a patient's specimen, just like any of their data, is being used for public good, for research learning, we have to find ways to make sure we're communicating that back to the patient whose specimen was first shared. That has an amplifying effect, whereas doing the opposite will swing us back to the days of Henrietta Lacks and the risk that we're using specimens in ways that we may think are good for research, but are being done in ways that do not have the transparency that people would expect. When we're leveraging EHR data, when we're leveraging samples inside of a biobank, these are incredible opportunities to include people, to make sure that they know that wherever they are, whatever their resources and means, they can contribute. Maybe they can't write a check to support a research program through an advocacy group, but they can share data and they can share a specimen. And if we're transparent back with them, they can know the impact that they're making through that sharing.
What essential changes are needed internally with a pharma organization in order to support breakthrough approaches and to help encourage its members to accept the innovations?
Perhaps the biggest breakthrough in the life sciences space over the last 2 years during the pandemic has been thoughtful risk-taking and the willingness to adopt and to implement. Now, organizations will be busy right now. They're busy scaling and sustaining many of the positive changes that were implemented over the last 2 years. Decentralized trials is an example of one such area. But eventually we will have fully digested all of that change. What we don't want to find is that we're waiting for the next pandemic to catalyze adoption of the new. And so perhaps one of the biggest breakthroughs for us today is how do we sustain this culture of willingness to adopt? This starts at the top, but it extends throughout the organization in terms of having a supportive culture, of celebrating thoughtful risk, whether it's successful or not, of rewarding the right behaviors, not just solely based on outcomes that may drive rushing and urgency, but including those for teams that do stop and take meaningful but controlled risk that allow us to continue to evolve our work together.
What's the most useless invention in pharma?
I think the most useless invention in pharma is the standing meeting. I think the recurring meeting that's put on the calendar for a team to reconvene with a pre-dictated frequency and duration drives certain behaviors. And some of those behaviors are just meeting for the sake of meeting because it has a cadence, and feeling left out if you're not in that meeting, so that some people feel that they just have to be there or they're going to miss something. We should meet because we need to meet, and when we don't need to meet, we should be getting on with our work and getting on with our lives.
Here is another funny one, and it's going to be my last but one question. Big Pharma conspiracy theory claims that pharmaceutical companies, especially large corporations, operate for sinister purposes and against the public good, that they conceal effective treatments or even cause a wide range of disease for the purpose of profitability. Is there a grain of truth to these claims?
Pharmaceutical companies and healthcare systems are the same people. It's the same physicians and researchers that are porously moving back and forth from one to the next. And just because somebody has a business card that says industry today, whereas they might have been your doctor yesterday, doesn't mean that they're suddenly willing to tolerate nefarious data hoarding behaviors, or even worse, nefarious practices that may lock away a meaningful treatment. That's what these people are in it for. I think that the best strategies for pharma in light of a conspiracy-fueled environment is just to over-index on transparency, to continue to make data as available and as widely accessible as possible.
Your forecast for the next 3 big shifts on the horizon for the pharma industry?
I think a first big shift for pharma on the horizon would be to stop listening to patients. And that may seem paradoxical. There's a lot of talk today that we need to listen to patients. We need to stop listening and we need to engage and have conversation. I sit down with patient groups on a regular basis, and more often than not, they're being invited to a table and being invited to a conversation. They may be sharing input, but they still don't understand why. Why is it that that study design or that endpoint or that practice hasn't changed? We're not sharing back. We're not talking to them. We're just raising a question and listening. Pharma and the life sciences space has to stop listening and start engaging in a meaningful conversation. I would say a second area for the industry as we think ahead will be this continued commitment around the use of data and digital to impact their processes end-to-end. And I think that this end-to-end theme is going to become particularly exciting around the drug development space. Today, we have a lot of interesting point solutions that are exciting on their own, impacting different aspects of the drug development process. Tomorrow, we're already starting to see the signs of what it looks like in terms of linking these processes together. And how do we start with an idea and end with a regulatory submission and automate all of those discrete processes in between? It doesn't mean it's all happening in one magical black box, but simply connecting the outputs of one process to automate and feed into the inputs of the next.
Craig, thanks for sharing your experience and valuable insights. That's all I have prepared for you for today. Thank you for being with us, and hey, good luck with fixing global clinical trials.
Thanks, and good luck to you for fixing the rest of the healthcare ecosystem. Thanks again.